Hello, yogis. Welcome to this four-part series that I'm so excited to be presenting to you about this holy nectar of the soul we call cerebrospinal fluid. So, this is an excerpt out of the Soul Codes Kundalini Wisdom Science teacher training. And I just wanted to let you know that I am guided by Grand Omnipresent Design. It's God working through me, and all of this is in praise to the Most High. Okay. So, delving into this, there are some terms that I use throughout my course and throughout the yogic context where sometimes I go in and out of using them. And so I wanted to at least provide a reference for what I'm talking about. And anytime you hear a word that you don't recognize, I really encourage you to look into the etymology of it because words create our worlds. And the basic understanding of how all of this is constructed is done through words. And so it's really important to ask yourself what they mean if you're ever not knowing what I'm talking about. So, one of the words I use a lot is sadhana. And by sadhana, it is almost like a moment of ritualistic spiritual connection. And it could be, it doesn't actually have to be during your mornings or during your evenings. It could be at any time. But basically, this is a daily spiritual practice and a means of forging a connection with God and with a universal energy. I use the word Kriya a lot, which literally means guided action or completed action. Asana, which is in reference to actually a sitting meditation pose, but it can stand for any sort of posture. Also, I use the word mantra. So, the primordial tone that engages the mind through focusing on sound vibration, the duration, and the repetition. Pranayam, which is in reference to breathing techniques. Mudras in reference to hand seals or gestures that help to direct our energy to different pathways. And the bandhas, which are so incredibly important when we're talking about cerebral spinal fluid. It means lock or bind in yoga. So, as you're taking in this information, I always encourage you to visualize the apana leaving the body on the exhale and see and feel this energy that no longer serves you. It has served you before, but it's no longer needed. Bless it as you leave, and then welcome in a new breath. So, inhale, exhale. And this is a visualization of what we're talking about today. Whoops. So hopefully you're able to see this video. You'll actually see the cerebral spinal fluid filling the third ventricle, filling the other areas of the brain. And then eventually it begins to bathe the entire cavity of the brain. And this happens every time we're doing the breathing techniques as well as our Kriya. So that's what we're talking about today is the blue part of this diagram. So here is a basic introduction. Now, when we're saying the term CSF, we actually mean cerebral spinal fluid. When we're saying the term somarasa, when we're saying the term amrit, we're saying the term holy nectar, holy fire. Well, holy fire is different than holy nectar. The nectar is the actual, well, we'll get into that. So, cerebral spinal fluid for short is a clear liquid substance that bathes the spaces within and around the spinal cord, as well as the brain stem and the brain. It plays a crucial role in sustaining consciousness and coordinating all of our physical activity. And it facilitates the Kundalini awakening process. So, there's about 100 to 150 milliliters of CSF in the adult body on average, which is about 2/3 of a cup. The body itself produces 450 to 600 milliliters. So if you can think of 2/3 of a cup and then obviously multiply that by four, so a full cup of CSF per day, that's like a Sprite can. The CSF is continually produced and all of it is replaced every 6 to 8 hours. When we practice, we're actually increasing the amount of cerebral spinal fluid. So the cavities within the brain are these fluid reservoirs called ventricles, and they create the CSF. So this figure here is actually a great representation of that first video. The brain ventricles serve as passageways or channels for consciousness. So when these passageways are blocked or obstructed, we have a loss of consciousness. The most significant brain ventricle in this is the third ventricle, which encompasses the central area of the brain, and it contains the pineal and pituitary glands, as well as the thalamus and the hypothalamus. And it's the connecting point between the rational upper parts of the brain and the survival-based function of the lower brain. And basically, the ancient yogis revered this space because of its spiritual qualities. The Taoists call it the Crystal Palace. Hindus call it the Cave of Brahma. And Egyptians call it the Eye of Horus. As you can see, this is like cut in half and it looks like an actual eye. And this is the foundation of the mind, body, and spirit connection. We can experience deep feelings of bliss, peace, and oneness with Source originating in the third ventricle, and it serves as a portal to our universal knowledge. I'm going to explain why here. CSF can transmit light, vibrations, movement, and molecules. And this is a photo of the ependymal cilia in the cerebral ventricles by a neuroscience student named Calvin Carter. The CSF also bathes the outside of the brain, and it provides buoyancy and shock absorption on a physiological level. After serving the brain and the brainstem, the CSF travels down the spinal cord central canal as well as outside of it. The central canal is a hollow space that's filled with CSF, and it goes all the way down the spine. Even though the spinal cord ends between the first and the second lumbar vertebrae, right above the waist area, the CSF goes down through the sacrum. Once it reaches the bottom of the spine, CSF gets absorbed back into the bloodstream. CSF can transmit light, vibrations, movement, and molecules. It also transports nutrients and hormones to the entire brain and nervous system. The sacrum is our holy temple. So you'll see it here. It looks like bones that are actually fused together. It is actually derived from the Latin word like SAC, which actually is the beginning of the word sacred as well. So that's just a side note. But it houses and protects the genital organs, the plexuses, and the lower subtle energy centers, all of which are involved in activating Kundalini awakening process. And we're going to break down what that actually means in this. The sacrum is also responsible for pumping the CSF upwards into the brain. This fluid sustains consciousness and plays a crucial role in activating the higher brain centers upon spiritual awakening. So there is a doctor by the name of Mauro Zapatera, and he has done some research on CSF and found that CSF originates from amniotic fluid. The brain and the spinal cord develop while bathed in the fluid, and this demonstrates the connection between our primordial fluids and consciousness. So you'll see here, this is the amniotic fluid in a sac of you, little you. Our CSF is actually seawater, so we're going to look at the starfish. CSF evolved as a way to receive signals from the environment required for the functioning of the nervous system. Brain cells in the starfish that are making contact with ocean water are very similar to the cells found in the neural plate of a developing mammalian embryo. Throughout evolution, as there is more closure of this body plan, such as in sea worms, there's an internal seawater within the nervous system of the worm and an external seawater on the outside of the worm that's still mixing with the mixing of fluids, as the cells contacting the internal seawater are similar to the cells found along the neural tube. The mixing of fluid from external to internal is similar to the cerebrospinal fluid and how it functions in our system, and the amniotic fluid that's mixing in the womb. And so evolutionarily, seawater is the first internal fluid environment of the brain. These cells that contact the surrounding fluid have a special role of receiving and transforming information from the fluid, whether it is ocean water like a starfish or cerebral spinal fluid in vertebrates. So our ancestral seawater is actually CSF. And here's a quote from Yogananda that talks about this. The spine and the brain are altars of God. That's where the electricity of God flows down to the nervous system into the world. And the searchlights of your senses are turned outwards. But when you will reverse the searchlights through Kriya Yoga and be concentrated in the spine, you will behold the maker. That's what self-realization teaches. The technique of meditation, recharging the body battery with cosmic energy. For it is not a creed or dogma, but science of soul and spirit. How the soul descended from the cosmic consciousness into earth and body and the sentence and the senses is the purpose of this work. And so, how do we actually move CSF? One of the main ways to do this is through Khechari Mudra. I'm going to actually go back a slide. When you look at this slide, it says movement and activation. CSF is actually influenced by breath work. It responds to meditation and the parasympathetic activity. It's connected to practices like Khechari Mudra and moved by heartbeat and sleep cycles. So if you actually look at this picture of Babaji, he is doing the closing of the windpipe. So I want to actually show you that other diagram again. So in this diagram, I just want to show you the tongue. Where is it? Here it is. So this whole area is the tongue. What Khechari Mudra is actually taking the tip of the tongue, swallowing it back, hitting this upper palate, and you go through this little area right here to actually open up this space where there's cerebral spinal fluid flowing. And the yogis call this, they say that it's a little bit salty and a little bit sweet, and it's called the sweet nectar, the immortal nectar. In our case, we're calling it the holy nectar. And it's referred to as Amrit. Okay. So this is how we actually move it. This is an example of spinal flexion. So on the inspiration, you're opening up the chest and you're pressing forward, opening up the Ren conception vessel, which is our yin line. And CSF begins to move up the spine very rapidly in that way. On the expire, we're rounding the spine, pressing the belly button toward the back of the spine. Here I have it exaggerated with my arms out in front of me, but you could just do a simple spinal flexion, which is going to be shown at the end of this presentation so that you're able to actually feel the cerebral spinal fluid and get it moving. I hope you enjoyed part 1 of our discussion on cerebral spinal fluid. The next piece is going to be the secrets of Kriya. Namaste, Sat Nam. Truth is my identity is our truth.